My question is, could we please recognize the oppression that exists in our society when it comes to women, and how that the system that's been built but in our society for thousands of years have been by men. It wasn't until 40 or 50 years ago that they couldn't get to vote. We should. That was the question. Can we recognize oppression for women?
Yes, we do. Thanks.
I'm a Ryerson social work student, a damn proud feminist. And my program's 90% women, and I can personally say I've never felt under attack as a man, ever. My question, I just want to repeat the gentleman over there's question, is this men's movement, which seems to extort the values of equality so much, what they're doing to recognize the inequality among men on lines of race, ability, and other things like that. Because all men are not equal, unfortunately.
That's something that a spokesperson for CAFE may want to deal with, and I'm sure they're very happy to talk to you about that. It's really outside the parameters of what I was talking about. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
Good question.
My name is Sheena. I'm a student at McGill University. And yeah, I just have a few questions about some of the claims that you made in your talk, and also one of the claims that's made in the description for the event. So in your talk, you seem to suggest that women's studies as a discipline is invoking a specter of inequality by calling class, race, gender into question in order to preserve its existence as a discipline. And so, I mean, you frame it as being like an active attempt to find inequalities. So I would argue that you don't have to actively attempt to find inequality, so there's much empirical evidence. So I'll just, off the top of my head, name some of this empirical evidence. So like in our parliaments right now, just under 25% of the members of parliaments are female identified in a nation with more than 50% women. I go to McGill University, and our arts undergraduate society, which is comprised of almost 60% women.
Excuse me, you have 45 seconds.
Yep, I know.
Please get to the question.
Yeah. I'm getting to the question. So our arts undergraduate society, which is comprised of 60% women, only has 1 out of 7 executive members as women. So there's much empirical evidence. I can literally go on and on for hours about the empirical evidence that demonstrates the lack of equality. So I'm wondering how you can substantiate your arguments that there is a lack of inequality empirically, as you suggest in your talk. Also, one more piece of description. Yeah, I have another question. So it seemed that the man before me had much more time to ask his question. Oh my, okay. So also in the event description, you state that anti-intellectualism and women's studies anti-intellectualism is what we're fighting against as people in the men's rights movement. What does anti-intellectualism mean? Does it mean like the intellect that white men have created and defined over the past 200 years? Yeah, what does it mean?
Well, I think it's precisely that kind of heated claim that intellect is something that men have defined, that women have a different sort of intellect, and that emotion should be more valued, or that sort of thing. I mean, that is precisely what I see as anti-intellectual. I think intellectual has a very clear meaning. It has to do with reason, it has to do with logic, it has to do with weighing evidence, it has to do with considering all perspectives. That's all I'm calling for.
So like empirical evidence, like women comprising 25% of parliament when they're 50% of the population.
Yeah, there's a difference between equality of opportunity and equality of result. This is... If you wanted to do a study of why there aren't 50% of women in the House of Commons, you could find all sorts of very interesting evidence. Many women don't want that particular career for a variety of reasons. There is no actual barrier in terms of discrimination against a woman deciding she wants to be a politician.
Point. I will end with the next video. It's a constructive point. So something that the men's rights movement doesn't address is the psychosocial conditioning of both women and men, and how that impacts, for example, women's decision to enter politics. And just on a last note, to the woman who was speaking before, she prefaced her statement that she's surprised as to the amount that violence is centered in women's studies with the statement, I've never taken a women's studies course before. While someone who's taken plenty of women's studies courses, I can tell you that violence is not the center of women's studies.
Okay, thank you.
First off, I want to thank you for confirming for me why I'm pursuing a graduate degree in women and gender studies. I was really intrigued by your talk, especially as you went through the course description, which were exactly what you called it, speculative. You know very little about the course from the description, and instead you literally made assumptions about the details of the course, and they were certainly constructed through your anti-women's studies lens. So my question for you, I want to ask you how you would address claims against your stance on women and gender studies as not only homogenizing of the discipline and those within it, some of whom don't even identify as feminists, but also homogenizing of men in power, and men and the ways that women and gender studies talk about power. And I also really want to urge you to get a better understanding of intersectionality, which emerges from women of color, many who identify as feminists or womanists, and their critique of white feminists. So.
Okay, thanks. I would say that, yes, of course, my discussion was, to a certain extent, speculative. I would be very interested to discover a course that actually contradicted my claims. And of course, I was generalizing. There are women working in women's studies who do fantastic scholarship. I wouldn't deny that. My point is that when there are those cases, they're almost secondary and they're surprising. When you have a discipline that is primarily ideological, it doesn't tend to produce that kind of open-minded, objective scholarship. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying that it's surprising when it does.
How do you think, or what effect do you think this dialogue of children need their father, what effect do you think that this dialogue is going to have on particularly lesbian couples who want to have children?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but I suppose it creates a challenge for
heteronormativity.
Yeah,
is what it does.
There's been a great deal of research that has actually shown that children do better with a mother and a father. So, I mean, if that...
Absolutely atrocious! And it is
That is
not
not
true!
empirically true.
That
Back
is,
it up, please.
back it up! I want a
Back it
citation!
up.
I want a citation right now!
Back it up.
So we've got
Show
time
me
for
where you
4
saw
more
the
questions,
study.
please. We've only got so much longer in the...
We have time for you to back
We've
up your
got time for
point.
4
Yeah,
more
back up
questions.
your
Please
point.
keep them to
You
45
want
seconds.
rigorousness?
We're not
I
allowed
think
to
you should be
be past a
rigorous.
certain time.
If there's a study out, you can all look it up on the internet. It's
Or she could claim what she's talking about.
She is the speaker.
She could she could prove what she's talking
Back up the
about.
claim that she makes.
Why isn't she required to prove what
She
she's
can back it
talking
up.
about? This is
Margaret
disgusting.
Somerville.
Hi everyone. How's it going? Hello. First off, there's no better spectator sport than watching sacred bulls get gored.
So are you.
So thank you. I'm enjoying this greatly. My entree to this subject was due to my activism in the new atheism movement, so-called. About a year ago, there was a schism called Atheism Plus that formed, where the plus meant plus a bunch of feminist tropes that a lot of people felt had nothing to do with atheism. My question is, what do you think it signifies that feminists have taken to co-opting other social movements that are unrelated to feminism? Your thoughts?
Well, just as in the case of Warren Farrell's talk, which many people wanted to shut down, because he seemed to me, because he was talking about boys and men. Too often, feminism wants to be the entire story. And the thought that attention might be devoted to men's issues is obviously disturbing to feminists. So I think when you believe that you are a righteous victim, you're not interested in anyone else's perspective if it challenges yours. That's my perspective on it.
Hello, I just want to point out two things. First, that everything is ideology, and if you think your ideology is not an ideology, then you are mistaken. And number two is, I have a problem with the form of how the presentation was given, in that usually when you want to critique something, you give it the best argument possible before you never went at what is feminism, all the different like if any preliminary study into feminism would see the intersectionalities, the disagreements between feminism, that feminism isn't one whole unitary thing. And the problem I have with this is basically you just went out and you started ranting against this concept that was illy defined in the first place, and then
is there a form of feminism that doesn't hold to the idea that all cultures are patriarchies?
Yeah, there.
Yeah.
That's patriarchy was one form of feminism, but the problem is that within feminism there's like postmodern feminism, there's like radical feminism, there's like liberal feminism, and there's so many different types of feminism.
Which is the form of feminism that doesn't hold that all cultures are patriarchies?
Well, my point was that you never even.
It's for the discussion.
The question was, why was it not the case that you gave the other side of the argument, like you're supposed to give the strongest argument possible and then take it down, not give like a weak argument and then punch it.
Well, I take your point, but my point
it's called a straw man. Like,
I wasn't interested in all of the different forms of feminism. I can talk to you about them if you want, but my point is that every form of feminism is based on an ideological agenda and based on an ideological supposition about patriarchy that I think is wrong. So that's all.
Just to tie the 2 points together, I think that every argument has a political utility, and I think that your arguments also have some sort of political utility, maintaining some sort of ideology as well.
But then your argument is also an argument.
Yeah, but I agree with it.
What are you saying? If nothing is abandoned.
Yes, hello. This isn't the last question, is it? No pressure, no pressure. So I just had a question for you. I noticed that you started the whole thing with, regardless of cheek or tongue, it was kind of putting men back in their gender roles. Isn't that what feminism kind of wants to get away from, is putting people in gender roles? And, the gentleman left. Heidi, you talk about the legal system and how men don't get access to their children. Totally agree. But wouldn't you say that's because society makes women nurturers? So aren't we looking at that? You're framing it like there's no patriarchy, but there absolutely is.
What's legal action?
My question is though, don't we look in society as women as nurturers? So wouldn't that have to do with why they get custody of the children? Oh, I totally agree with you, but that's not society's view on things, is it?
The problem is men are not being allowed to nurture their children.
Why?
That's the problem.
Why? Why do you think this though? If you're not talking about patriarchy.
Well, it's certainly not the men who have been lobbying and who have been asking for the opportunity to be nurturers. It is the feminist legal scholars who propound this idea that women are the primary caregivers.
Feminists, or you're saying feminists want to be put into that gender role, that they're just nurturers? Is that what you're trying to? Thank you.
It's been activism on the part of feminists that has created the legal situation that we're in now, in which fathers can't have access to their children and can't nurture.
Last question, sir. This is the last question.
Just a little bit of background for me. I have 2 little girls. I started in court when they were 2 and 3. I had to take it all the way to a 12-day trial where I had to self-represent myself because my lawyer told me I was going to lose. And she told my parents, who were helping me fund my legal fees, that I was going to lose. I had to take it to court for 12 days. to maintain equal shared parenting, which is what I thought was what was best for our children. And in the end, what the judge thought. But I had to educate myself for over a year and a half on legal terms, on reading about law, on reading about what's in the best interest of children. There should be an automatic presumption. When a child loses its family in a divorce or separation, they should not lose a parent. My question is this. In my travels of trying to find a support system because I was a victim of financial abuse, and I was the higher breadwinner, but I was the victim of financial abuse, I was the victim of verbal abuse, I was the victim. Why doesn't the government fund programs for men getting through this stuff? And how do we go about suggesting to the government to start equal funding for these programs? There is a program in Peterborough called Peaceful Families. That was my question.
Yeah, you know you need to organize, that's it. And I think organizations like CAFE are about giving a voice to precisely men like yourself who have those concerns. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Sorry, we don't have any more time. We're only allowed to have the theater for so long, and we've run out of time. Sorry about the people that couldn't ask questions.